Which is weird.
Hello, everybody. Lovely to have you all here for the fifth session in this our series on the mountain. This is part, of course, of the Humanities Center's ongoing project of natural landscapes and human meaning. Our focus, for those of you who've been here, of course, you'll know this, but our focus thus far has largely been on the arts and humanities approach to the mountainous theme. But as you all know, a large driving impulse behind our work in the Humanities Center is to bring the humanities and the sciences together in dialogue. And one of the things that makes me very happy, and really sort of brings a great warmth to my otherwise cold English heart, is to look out here and see so many people from the sciences. It makes me extraordinarily happy. This is it's not an obvious thing that a Humanities Center does. So it's a kind of it's a beautiful thing, I think. And along those lines, I'm absolutely delighted to have three scientists speak with us and on a fascinating theme today. You know, the mountain is a very conspicuous thing, huge, foreboding, and yet there are mountains that are not commonly or easily seen. And this is today's topic, and these are today's speakers. Michel Boudrias received his PhD from UCSD's Scripps Institution of Oceanography and is Associate Professor in the Department of Environmental and Ocean Sciences. His research interests focus on long-term ecological studies of shallow water coastal habitats impacted by human activities and also on the environmental effect of tourism. He is director of the university's Care for Our Common Home pathway, coordinating USD's efforts in climate change responses, sustainability, and environmental justice. Dr. Boudrias has been the recipient of 2 prestigious National Science Foundation grants and is one of the United States representatives on the Greening Curriculum Program at UNESCO, which will be presented at COP28. This will be Michel's 4th contribution to our Natural Landscape series, which I think is pretty remarkable. Thank you. Ron Kaufmann is Professor of Environmental and Ocean Sciences, Associate Dean for Programs and Curriculum in the College of Arts and Sciences, and he also oversees the interdisciplinary curriculum element of the Humanities Center's operations. So a big friend of the Humanities Center. Well, more than a friend. I mean, you're one of the main figures in it. He received his PhD from UCSD's Scripps Institution of Oceanography as well, and specializes in environmental biology with an emphasis on the study of marine life in extreme environments, such as the Antarctic and the deep ocean. Dr. Kaufmann is, in addition, an expert on orchids. He is chair of the American Orchid Society Conservation Committee and co-author of the book Orchids of Tropical America. Like Michel, Ron has been a frequent contributor to our landscape series. He kicked off both the ocean and the Frozen Realms series, and it's, as always, great to have him back with us again. And Sean Mossman, it was lovely to know that, Sean, this is the first time that you've been speaking with us. This is gorgeous. Sean Mossman came to USD in 2021 as a full-time, non-tenure track instructor in the Department of Physics and Biophysics. He received his PhD from Washington State University in 2017, focusing on how fundamental rules of quantum mechanics put limits on the non-linear optical response necessary for certain device applications in photonics. Dr. Mossman subsequently undertook experimental work with ultra-cold atomic gases, exploring synthetic spin-orbit coupling, optical lattices, and non-linear hydrodynamics. Yeah. You may be surprised to know that I have this written down.
No, you nailed it, though. Excellent work.
Thank you. His current research efforts have been in producing arrays of a particular non-linear wave known as a peregrine soliton in an atomic Bose-Einstein condensate and investigating associated hydrodynamic instabilities. I am, as all of us are here, very excited to hear from you also. Please welcome Professors Boudrias, Kaufmann, and Mossman.
I was going to have to apologize to leave at 4:30, but it looks like my wife's taking care of the phone call, so I may be with you for the whole time. First, I want to thank Brian for two main reasons. One is, of course, this whole concept of landscapes has been really phenomenal, and it's been really great to get it from so many different perspectives, and I think it is the heart of what USD should be doing, an interdisciplinary approach to topics, have us come in and listen to our colleagues to specialize in different places, so thank you for that. The second thing is I've always noticed that the first session is Brian and a scientist. But I like that because the scientist would give the facts and set the table, and Brian would come at it with his knowledge about philosophers and explorers. So the first few slides are set up the same way today to tell you about a deep sea explorer you might know. And then I'm going to tell you about a topic that immediately came to my mind and Ron's mind last semester at the end of the ice session, and Brian said, we're going to do mountains, and we both said, you know, there's a lot of mountains under the ocean, and we need to do those. So today, we're not looking up. We've spent the whole day, the whole semester looking up, or going up and looking down. Today, we're looking down. Mountains unseen. We're going to look down at the edge of creation, the creation of mountains, and in fact, habitats that resemble Earth at its time of creation. Now, we had to be thematic today, but I also wanted to start with this idea that we've been talking about the mountains, and I'm going to talk about the wave that's going to go over the mountain and make it go away. So we're going to start with the Great Wave to set us in the mood of the mountains disappearing. Now, I'm using this slide from Beth. Many of you were here the first day. Beth used this slide to remind us that if we took away the water from the planet, we would find mountain ranges everywhere. And the planet, since the ocean is 71% of our planet, there's mountains everywhere. If you have hiked in the desert and gone to the Badlands, Ron and I and Sue have been to the underwater equivalent of the Badlands. Go off the coast, go straight west, go down 2,000 meters, and it looks like the Badlands. They're just underwater. So today I want you to have your gaze looking down. We're talking about these mountains that you have never seen, but three or people in this room have actually been there. You have an unusual situation where there's three faculty members who started their career in the deep sea, Sue, Ron, and I. And combined, we have over 20 submersible dives. So we've actually been to these places. So you have some real-life views of the mountains unseen. Now, I could have started with one of the early scientists who talked about setting a place to study oceanography. Sue also went to SIO. So this is William Ritter, who's building his name to everyone, was one of the first ones to think about having a place. I could be talking about plate tectonics and talk about Wegener, but those are not the explorers. Those are from like the 1800s. We're going to talk about explorers that are a little bit more recent. In 1977, they discovered the first hydrothermal vents, the area of the bottom of the ocean where we create the mountains, where we're splitting the crust. And it was captured in a video by National Geographic called Dive at the Edge of Creation. And a young man of 18 or 19 years old saw this video. And not quite as profound as Brian's quotes, he said, I'm going to go there and explore the deep sea. Yes, it's the famous French-Canadian explorer. Me. Now, the crazy thing is 10 years later, I actually did. I went to there. And what's even crazier is I looked through Sue's on that video, and Sue's major professor, Ron's major professor, and my major professor for our PhDs were all on that video in 1977, 1978. So I want to put you in the mood. Mitch, you talk about a sensorum, you're now in the deep sea. It's not going to be quite as cold, but at least it's a little bit darker than it was. So when you think of the deep sea, it's cold. 2 to 5 degrees C is the typical temperature of the bottom of the ocean. It's dark with no natural light below 1,000 meters or so. It has generally low to moderate oxygen with a few exceptions. The pressures are really high, high enough to do this to a styrofoam cup, and I'll pass this around. This is an actual styrofoam cup that went down to 4,000 meters in one of my dives. We all have those. We have a bunch of them because it's a thing to do, but you will see that's what pressure does to air spaces. The bottom is mostly sand and silt, or what we might call mud, some hard substrates. And for the most part, there's really no food production in deep sea. It's too far, there's no light, there's no primary production, and a lot of it is based on food falls. And if you want another talk, Ron and I can give you at least a couple of hours of conversations on food falls since we spent several years studying them. Except there are a few places that are not quite like the regular deep sea. So what I mean by the regular deep sea would be something like this. By the way, Ron and I were responsible for some of these photos. And this is all sea stars, probably hundreds of them. And to have this many in one place, we're guessing there's probably was a food fall not too long before that. Notice the colors. They're white. There's no need to have a lot of color if it's dark in the deep sea. Or they're blue. By the way, it's very patriotic. They're red, white, or blue. You might think that's American. I think it's the colors of the Montreal Canadiens, so that works either way. That's a sea cucumber. It's roughly 3 feet long, so they're big. They're all over the place in the bottom of the ocean. There's a bunch of mounds and holes, so Ron and I spent many years of our lives looking at these photographs, and if we can tell you all the things that are there. And if you're really lucky, you could take a photo like this. That's one of they call the Dumbo octopus. It's a photo I took out of the side of a submersible in the Northwest Pacific. Other parts of the deep sea are just a bunch of rocks like this. If you've been to Hawaii, it looks like that. This is volcanic rock that extrudes from the bottom, or sometimes it gets crumpled up. But notice there's not a lot going on at the hard substrate for the most part. I'll go back to that word again, except. Except at the spreading ridges. And when we first started in 1977, it was just in one place, right? It was here in the East Pacific Rise. And then they went to the Mid-Atlantic, and they found some there. And then we went to the Western Pacific, and we found some there. Now they just found, just today, Ron, South America there's a paper out, they've just found some in South America. This is any place on the earth where we're creating mountains are these special exceptions to real life in the deep sea. It is these vents of hot water and minerals and some poisonous chemicals as well that are coming through the bottom of the ocean and creating truly an oasis of life. Where you have nothing around it, you get here and you have an incredible diversity of new, extraordinary, and very different kind of life. It's also becoming important for other reasons because that's where all these precious metals are coming out. So these areas are also the place where the lithium and the cadmium and all these other things are coming out of the ocean floor. And there's different kinds of vents, and I'm going to show you 3 different kinds. The lower temperature ones, which are 2 to 60 degrees. Remember, normally it's 2 degrees at the bottom, and the vents were, the ones that first went were 20 to 25 degrees. So think about how much heat it would take to heat up millions of gallons of water just a few degrees. And that's how the geophysicists found them. They went, something's not right. There's some extra warm something going on here. And then they dove and took pictures and started finding the vents. So let's go back into Alvin. This is the submersible that has done the most of the work, though the French, the Japanese, the Russians have submersibles as well. Alvin is the one that has a little over 5,000 dives. Most of them have been to all over the world. You fit 3 people in Alvin in a very small space. You're there for 9 hours. You get really friendly. You get cold. You get a little bit wet. But you get to see things that no one else has seen. So let's go take a look. You get to the edge of the vent, you have unusual things, not from, you've seen these, you've been to the intertidal, you may have seen an anemone, except this one is about a foot wide, 30 or so centimeters wide, and about 20 centimeters long. I know this because that's a probe that's measured, and that's half of a 3D picture of that anemone. You find these white crabs and smaller anemones on the edge. So there's nothing, 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 and then you get the beginning of life, the beginning of the edge of the oasis. And then some of them get scared and swim off. And then you get to see deep sea spiders. So that's the weights that are used to ballast the sub. And that deep sea spider is about the same width as the weight, so it's about 20 centimeters across, right? So all these weird forms of life, but not a lot of them, sort of like the deep sea. And then you get to the vent. And this is in Galapagos. So you get to the Galapagos Islands and go down 2,000 meters. And you see this diffuse hot water and minerals coming out of the bottom and a bunch of dense life, all stuck in the cracks. And the iconic photo, this one, is what really is on the cover of books. It's in a bunch of textbooks, and it got my friend Scott and I through grad school because we sold it many, many times and got money for our supplies for our work, right? This is the giant tube worm. It was discovered at the vents, and it was a truly amazing discovery. 3 people in the world knew about these kind of weird worms. They were slightly unusual marine biologists who worked in the mud and shallow water. No one really cared until they found this one. This worm could be as tall as 6 feet. It's got this bright red plume. It's got a white body. It also has no mouth, no gut, and no anus. And how do you get to be 6 feet tall? It's because they found a new form of primary production, chemosynthesis. This worm is full of bacteria that live in its gut. And instead of dying or being impacted by hydrogen sulfide, it uses that as the fuel to create its own organic matter that then passes on to the worm, and the worm can do incredibly well. There's also all these giant clams. You can get to see a giant clam. Not many people have these. I got a few tricks up my sleeve. So these are not your regular clam at the store. They're also not your regular clams because they have red blood. They have a variety of physiological mechanisms. They also live off hydrogen sulfide, and they're incredibly dense. There's thousands of them in this small space. The space is probably about 40 meters squared, so it's not a very big place, right? And what they do is they stick their foot down into the cracks, and they take the hydrogen sulfide. They also are filled with bacterial symbionts, and they've lived there and do incredibly well. And then there's mussels. They live a little bit further away. They tend to be living off the material floating around and the bacteria and everything else. Again, you don't find in the deep sea. We've looked at a lot of pictures. You don't find this dense array of thousands of organisms living in a pretty small space. Think of this room basically filled with organisms. And there's crabs that'll live on the out of them, nibble at them, live off the organisms that are there. We cracked that clam, so the crab went and grabbed it and ran off with it. There's an entire ecosystem unique to these spaces, and it was only discovered less than 50 years ago, right? And we've returned a few times. So I want to show you what happens when you return. So this picture was taken in 1983, so they went back 6 or 7 years later, big giant plumes, the worms are doing great, and then we went back in 1988, and they're starting to get covered. It turns out that that's all based on the plumbing. The vents start slowing down. There's not as much of that material going across. Then the clams start to take over, and they start growing on top of the worms. This is a place where our mountains come from. This is where the plates of the earth are cracking, and now we've created this new place to live, sort of like the top of the mountain, but 2,000 meters below the surface, if you think of it that way. And then the more we checked out the edge, the less the worms were doing well. They were getting covered. We started seeing some fish. You can see that there's also brown stuff on top of it, so the material is starting to break down. They're not doing as well. It looks like they last probably 20 to 30 years, and then the plumbing crooks somewhere else, the cracks open up somewhere else, this community disappears, a new community pops up somewhere else. We caught this fish. It was captured. We brought it back. We gave it to the famous ichthyologist that was at Scripps when the 3 of us were there. And then New York Times called. And my boss said, oh, Michel, you can take the interview. You were there. Okay, so I do the interview. And two important things in my life occurred with that. First, I was asked what it looked like. And then I had not have any training at the time. So I said, oh, it's a pretty ugly looking fish. And then they got my name wrong. So it was one of those boxed highlights in the New York Times. And it said, it's a pretty ugly looking fish, said Ms. Michel Boudrias. There was no internet then, but the number of copies of that article in the New York Times I have from across the country was pretty impressive. Especially asking me how my sister was doing. I'm an only child, clearly not my sister. So be careful what you say, I guess, is the message when you discover something new. And then you get to the edge, and all those big things are gone. Smaller organisms, and then the shot that we got one of the vampire toothus, the vampire octopus. This is also half of a 3D image. So when you're down there for 5 hours taking photos, it's 9 hours total. It's 2 hours to get down, 2 hours to come back up, 5 hours on the bottom. It's an expensive endeavor. It's $25,000 a day for the submersible, and another $25,000 a day for the submersible, for the ship. That's 30, 40 years ago, so it's a little bit more now. So you have to take all of that time to do all of that work. So that's your first special place in the deep sea. We're going to go back now to look at the map, just to remind you that this is everywhere. So now we're going to go to the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So somewhere between 1977 and 1988, when we went back, a different group of scientists went. They knew about the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, the massive mountain chain in the middle of the Atlantic. What they didn't think was that the spreading rate there was so much slower, they didn't think they'd find vents. They figured, okay, it's not going to quite be the same thing. Let's see what's there. And what they found was a totally different place. No giant worms, no clams, thousands and thousands of these shrimp with no eyes, infrared light they could pick up, but no visible eyes, and this black smoke spewing out of these chimneys. Now, the first time they went there and they said, wow, this is amazing, and they stuck the special thermometer in there to get the temperature, and it melted. It turns out that this is not 25 degrees. This is 350 degrees centigrade. Now, water boils at 100, but under pressure, you can superheat and superboil the water. Another great view of the black smokers. So, Galapagos, diffuse, 20 to 30 degrees, warmer than normal. Mid-Atlantic Ridge, whole different world. Said, okay. And there's all the shrimp, just amazing number of shrimp that are living off these things. So then we went, let's go somewhere else. It's great to be in a deep sea lab. Ron and I and Sue had some amazing experiences. I realized a few years later, I was at the Smithsonian, and there was an exhibit on deep sea vents, and everybody was oohing and aahing. And I'm like, yeah, that's Roger, and there's Paul. And then I realized I have to recapture my sense of awe, because this is an amazing thing. Not many people have had that chance to do this, and it is an amazing place to go. So in 1987, a geologist had found, again, temperature anomalies, but right next to the Marianas Trench. But not the trench where the mountains go underwater, but where we actually produce the mountains. And so we went to the Marianas Back Arc Basin, where you're getting the splitting of the crust again. And we went down to find the vents, but we got lost. It is not a comfortable feeling to get lost in a submersible at the bottom of the ocean. And it turns out that what they do is they put transponders to tell us where you're supposed to be, but they create a mirror image. And so they dropped us in the opposite location, and now we have to drive. It's 4,000 meters below the surface, and the pilot's going, I don't see anything. And then he goes, there's a tree outside. Now, it's not a tree, obviously. This is a giant coral. It is roughly 2 meters tall and about 1.5 meters across, just one. At the edge of a rock, nothing else around it. And it's an example of the extraordinary life in a place like the top of a mountain where you have that tree that fights against the wind. This is the coral that is in the deep sea that found that one space where the food is right, the currents are right, and there's no competition, and it just takes over. But we're still lost. So we move on, took about an hour of driving, and then we went, let's go get something. So this is Alvin, where how we collect things. And we collected a chimney there. And so I have a piece of rock that we can share, if I can find it. It's dark. Here. this is about as young a piece of rock as you can find. This is where the mountains get formed. It's obsidian like you might find in other places, except it's right from one of the chimneys that was discovered in the Marianas Backward Basin. And now a whole new community again. These anemones look like we're in the intertidal, except we're at 4,000 meters. Again, this part has two types. This diffuse area, like we saw in the Galapagos, and then a bunch of other stuff, and then more and more of these. And then these snails, and these mussels, and the water that's sort of shimmering here is clear. It's not a black smoker, it's a clear smoker, and that water is 250 degrees centigrade. And that community is totally different. It's not like the Atlantic, it's not like the Galapagos, it's its own world in and of itself. Each of these mountain ranges, each of these places at the edge of creation is its own little world. In this case, we have these snails that are all over the place. We have these crabs that are eating there. We have some anemones. We collected all this work. So this is the snail. Looks like a regular kind of snail, except its gill is about 5 times the size of every other snail, and it also has the symbiotic bacteria. So it's a snail that can eat like a normal snail, but it can live at the vent and it can withstand the hot temperature. This was an amazing find. This is a worm whose shells was right on the chimney itself, which means that the back end of the worm was closest to the warmest water that multicellular organisms can live at a pressure of 400 atmospheres at the bottom of the ocean, next to water that's super hot. The crazy thing, by the way, is the water is super hot right in the chimney, and a couple of centimeters away, it's 2 degrees again. It's an incredible place. And then we found these barnacles slightly toasted from the heat, also covered in minerals. And this is why we're still at the edge of creation. I was working with a professor on barnacles. He had published a paper in the evolution of barnacles and had predicted what the barnacle is at the cusp of where the barnacles that live on the pilings, the polyspes, the gooseneck barnacles, and the regular barnacles, and he predicted what it looked like based on a fossil organism, and that's it. Not a fossil organism. I called him on the sat phone at $10 a minute to say, we got some barnacles living there. And it turns out this is an image of what it was like when Earth was forming. These are the early forms of life that are still living fossils. Our crab here that's blind has hairs on his claws and just basically grabs the food, sometimes cleans off the back of the snail. So what do we have? We have 3 worlds, 3 glimpses at the planet the way it was, 3 places in the mountain creation space of the Earth that is not like anywhere else. It's not like the deep sea, the regular deep sea. It's not like shallow water. It's like nothing and nowhere else. And I will leave you with this deep thought. I don't know why I don't care about the bottom of the ocean, but I don't, except at least in this room, there's 3 people I know care about it deeply, and hopefully some of you now have a new appreciation for the bottom of the ocean. Thank you.
Whoa. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. I'm going to take this in a sort of slightly different direction. I'm going to maybe echo a couple things that have been said already. So, as Brian mentioned at the beginning, we have all these mountains that we're used to seeing, right? They're above ground. They're magnificent in many cases. I didn't actually coordinate with anybody regarding Mount Fuji. That's just sort of a coincidence. But anyways, Mount Fuji in the lower left, the Grand Tetons in the upper left. These 2 pictures on the right, this is Torres del Paine National Park, which is in southern Chile. If you have not been there, I highly recommend it. It is stunning, it's spectacular, and it's relatively underpopulated compared to places like Yosemite, but really, really magnificent. So we're used to seeing mountains like this, and they're remarkable, they're spectacular, but it turns out, and it depends entirely on which number you use and which criteria you use, but there are somewhere between 25,000 and 200,000 mountains below the surface of the ocean. And the number that I've seen that seems to be at least cited most frequently, if not the most correct, is around 100,000 mountains that are at least 1,000 meters above the seafloor. But since the average depth of the ocean, the average depth of the Pacific Ocean at least, is 6,000 meters, so 20,000 feet roughly, you could have a 3,000-foot peak that's still 17,000 feet below the water. And there are tens, if not tens of thousands at least, of these things. Let's see. So let's talk for a moment about what a seamount is. A seamount is basically, this is going to be super generic. A seamount is basically any feature that sticks up above the seafloor. That's a very precise definition, right? There are various terms that are used to describe them. Seamounts was sort of what it sounds like, an undersea mountain. There are geos, which are essentially flat-topped versions of mountains, like a big, it's almost like a devil's tower, but sometimes much, much broader. There are banks, which tend to be more like ridges and that tend to be closer to the surface of the ocean. Do any of you fish? Are any of you like marine or ocean fisher folk? Wow. Okay. Well, if some of you were, you would probably have heard that some of the best fishing off the coast of California is on some of these shallow banks. And I'll explain to you, I hope, why that might be. Depending on which estimate you use, there are, like I said, approximately 200,000, maybe 100,000 plus seamounts, estimated 200,000 features on the bottom of the ocean. And it has been said, and I believe this, that we actually know more about the surface of the moon and the detailed structure of the surface of the moon than we do about the detailed structure of the bottom of the ocean. And I believe that, and I'll try to explain to you why. So out of that 100,000-ish, fewer than 500 have been mapped, and I'm going to say maybe as many as 200 have been biologically studied, and the rest have not. So if you think that there are 100,000 out there, and we've studied less than 1/10 of 1% of them, that's really pretty remarkable, I would say. So you'll see that I wrote there, it's an estimated 200,000 features, estimated 100,000 seamounts. Why estimated? I mean, I said we know more about the surface of the moon than we do about the bottom of the ocean, but why are these estimates? Why don't we have a more precise count? Well, so let's ask a question. How do we study the bathymetry, the structure of the bottom of the ocean? How do we do that? Well, there are sort of two main ways to do it. The first one is to carry out seafloor mapping using a technique called satellite altimetry. And basically what that means is you use a satellite, you send a signal down or use reflected light to measure essentially the ocean surface or to measure the Earth's gravity field. And when you have a feature underneath the water, it causes just a little bit of a shift in the surface of the water, and you can detect that deflection, and that will tell you that there's something on the ocean beneath that deflection. Satellites are great. They have big wide swaths. They travel around the Earth all the time. You should be able to map the seafloor very efficiently in a very short period of time, right? Right? Yeah, okay. Well, that's all well and good. And when you do that, I'll tell you the why not in just a second, but it's all well and good. But when you do that, you get a map. I think Beth O'Shea showed a map that looked very much like this. So you can see what's going on. Michel talked about some of these features like here, the East Pacific Rise, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, Marianas Back Arc Basin over here. So those are all areas where you have ridges and larger structures, but all of these things in here, this is Hawaii right here, all these are seamounts, and then there are many, many smaller ones. So why can't we just use satellite maps and then know exactly what the structure of the bottom of the ocean looks like? Well, some of it has to do with the fact that that gravitational deflection is very, very tiny, and it requires a very large feature to make even a very small change in the sea surface gravitational field. So it's estimated based on current technology that the feature has to be at least 1,800 meters high and at least 5,000 meters wide. That's a pretty big feature. And some of these seamounts and other sorts of seafloor features are smaller, so they're not going to actually deflect the gravitational field, and you won't be able to detect them with a satellite. So instead, you have to use another mechanism, and the sort of like the old school way to do this is through seafloor mapping using sonar. Now, sonar's been around for about a century. It's been fairly well implemented for about the last 80 to 90 years. It really took off in the 1930s and into the 1940s. And it's essentially driving a ship, sending a beam of sound down to the bottom. The cone of sound spreads as it goes down, and then you measure the reflection, and that tells you how deep the water is, just like a fish finder or any other sort of sound-based mapping tool. Of course, as the beam spreads, so the deeper the water is, the more the beam spreads and the more you lose the resolution, so you start averaging over wider and wider areas, so you can't necessarily see smaller features. But when you do that, this is sometimes called swath mapping, you get a map that looks sort of like this. So this is somebody in a not very systematic way driving around on a ship, and you get these are lower altitude or elevation areas, higher elevation areas, and it's color-coded, so blue is deeper and red is higher. And you can see that there are some suggestions of features here and there. And you would imagine that if you did a sort of systematic set of surveys, you could start to build up a pretty decent map of the seafloor. But this is very laborious. A friend of mine once said, mapping the bottom of the ocean using this technique is like mapping the bottom of an Olympic-sized swimming pool using a toothpick. It takes a while. So what you find is that there are parts of the ocean that are actually very well mapped. And you might expect that those are areas because, you put these sonars on ships, then you have the ships go from place to place. The areas that are very well mapped tend to be close to large ports. They tend to be along regular shipping lanes. They tend to be in areas that are adjacent to more affluent regions where there are lots more ships that are going back and forth versus less affluent regions. The northern hemisphere generally tends to be better mapped than the southern hemisphere. And so here is an example. This is a project called Seabed 2030 that has as its goal the complete mapping of the entire surface of the ocean floor by 2030. It is not quite 6 years from that date, and they're about 25% done. So still got a ways to go, may not make the 2030 target, but you can see there are some areas like here that's been pretty well surveyed, and there are other areas that are the size of Texas plus Alaska that are completely unmapped. And just to give you a sense of just how reliable this is and what we think we know and what we actually know, this is a seamount called Kahalewai, which I may have mispronounced. It was mapped in 2017 as part of a NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration cruise. After it was mapped using this ship-based survey technique that I mentioned, it was found to be 4,200 meters high in an area that's 6,000 meters deep, so it's still 1,800 meters below the surface. It was 1,000 meters taller than it was understood to be before the survey, just to give you a sense of how well we actually know what's down there. 1,000 meters, 3,000 feet off? Remarkable. So that is essentially kind of the nature of this whole mapping exercise and what we think we know. What was that? Oh, there, okay. So let me talk a little bit about seamounts and see where we are with time. Oh, hey, what do you know? All right, so let's talk a little bit about the seamounts themselves and what they actually do. So this is a schematic, again, a NOAA schematic, and I want to point out a few things. So what happens when you take a big mountain and plop it down in the middle of the ocean? And this totally misrepresents how they form. They actually come from the bottom up, but let's indulge me for a second. Okay, let's be authentic. Let's say you have some magma that pushes up this feature from the bottom of the ocean. What kinds of things would we expect to happen based on, I don't know, physics? There's some physicists in the audience. I think they've already figured this out. So a number of things happen. The first thing is if you've got a disruption right here and you have a current that is moving this way, you would expect, especially given this kind of slope, you'd expect that the current would do one of a number of things. It could actually go around. It can't go through. So it's actually going to either go around the feature, and so you get some circular flow around the feature like this. There is going to be some current that is going to get pushed upward. So that's what's called upwelling. And that in the ocean is especially interesting because the deeper you go in the ocean, in general, the higher the levels of nutrients in the water. So this has the effect of bringing deeper, more nutrient-rich water up closer to the surface. That's potentially a big deal. There is a type of structure called a Taylor column that forms. Here's where I'm looking at my physicist colleagues. And a Taylor column is essentially a persistent circulation feature that is over the top of the seamount that is essentially a circulating cell, sort of like this. And it doesn't persist it persists and then it breaks down and it persists and breaks down. It depends on the current flow. But having an object like this in an otherwise free-flowing area tends to modify the circulation in a lot of different ways. And so you get localized upwelling, that's true in general. You also get the circular flow in the Taylor column, and the last thing you get near the top of the seamount, and I'm going to say, again, the current's going this way, is you get accelerated flow over the top of the object. So the speeds that currents are flowing here are higher than the speeds up here or down here. And this is actually kind of important. It's important in part because it affects what happens to organisms that are living on top of the seamount, and I'll get back to that later. So we have all these different flow effects, including accelerated flow over the edge of the seamount. But arguably, one of the most important things that seamounts contribute, and I'm going to connect to something Michel said. Remember, he said that the majority of the deep ocean is covered by sediment, typically mud or silt, something pretty fine. But the amazing thing that seamounts have to contribute is hard substrate. And there are lots of organisms in the ocean that need hard substrate to anchor to because they're sessile and they need a stable attachment point so that they can stick up into the water and feed off particles that are flowing by them. So this is an example of a small pinnacle, and you can see all these different, these are examples of deep sea corals. And I want to point out a couple quick things. So Michel mentioned that there is no real reason to have color in the deep ocean, right? Because there's no light coming from the sun. So why would you have color? And yet you see some of these things that are purple and pink and yellow. And the reality is that what we understand to be true is that these colors aren't necessarily intended for visual organisms. So in the shallow water setting or in the air, if you're colored a certain way, sometimes it means that you're trying to communicate with other organisms. In this case, what we think is that some of the molecules that cause the color are either metabolic byproducts or are concentrated elements from their diet, things like that, that don't necessarily have a visual function. They just happen to look pretty when you go down with a camera, light them up, and take a photograph. So don't think of the color as necessarily being something that's communicating to visual organisms. I want you to notice a couple things. Notice that on this one outcrop, which is not very large, you've got what look like at least half a dozen different kinds of corals, different colors, different shapes. That's a lot of diversity in one little piece of rock. And you see that sort of thing in a number of locations. So I'm going to show you some photographs taken from the tops of seamounts. And I want you to notice a few things. Again, the colors are perhaps incidental. First, one of the things that happens when you get accelerated flow over the top of a structure is that the particles that are suspended in the water, that the suspension feeders, these filter feeders, are filtering out and eating as food, get accelerated. So that means there's more water and therefore more food coming past the top of that seamount at any given time. And so these areas right near the edge of the seamount have a higher food supply than areas that are farther away from the edge of the seamount. So you get lots and lots of these sessile suspension feeders that are adapted for pulling particles out of the water. And they come in various forms. These are bamboo corals. And I want you to notice something else. They have what's called, there's also what's called secondary hard substrate. And what that means is organisms living on top of other organisms. So if you look here, 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 all these yellow things, these are actually feather stars. There's a close-up of one of them. They are related to sea stars and sea cucumbers, except that they are suspension feeders. They have their arms out in the water, and they have little tube feet that sea stars use to crawl around and that they use to capture particles that are suspended in the water. And you get, in some of these areas, enormous amounts of secondary substrate. And you have things like, these are serpent stars that in shallow water burrow down into the sediment that are up on top of some of these corals. They stick their arms out into the water and use those to suspension feed. Or the pictures on the right here are, this is actually a deep sea sponge. And you can see all these little sea stars, actually brittle stars, that are living all over the inside of the sponge and are scavenging off the particles that are coming by. So lots and lots of food and lots of interesting organisms. Suspension feeding tends to be kind of a dominant mode. But a lot of this has to do with the accelerated current and also the hard substrate that the animals have access to. Seamounts have been characterized as islands for shallow biota. So if you have something sticking up into the water and the surrounding area is much, much deeper, you might imagine that you would have animals that are normally native to shallower water that can live on the sides of these seamounts at shallower depths than would otherwise be available if they were just down on the bottom. And as I said, some of these things are thousands of meters tall, so you can actually get quite a depth range. And it turns out that a lot of organisms in the ocean are very heavily stratified by depth. So depth is really important, and having shallow areas in otherwise deep water environments can be very helpful from the standpoint of providing habitats. That also means that seamounts have been described as stepping stones. So if you have an area of otherwise deep water and you have a line of seamounts, for example, some organisms can live on one seamount, produce larvae that drift to an adjacent seamount and to an adjacent seamount, and so you wind up with similar kinds of organisms living on seamounts across a chain. And just to sort of show a little bit of data on this, and I apologize for those of you who hate graphs, but sorry, here's a graph. So this is actually the Northwest Atlantic, so that's coast of New England up here, and a chain of 15 different seamounts from close to shore all the way to offshore. And what you see is the seamounts, so this is the same transect from close to shore to offshore, and you can see the seamounts that are closest to shore have lower numbers of organisms or lower numbers of species living on them, and then the ones that get farther and farther offshore show this pattern where two seamounts that are close together actually have more similar communities than seamounts that are farther apart. So the stepping stone thing seems to actually work pretty reliably. I should say that just to give you a sense of how much data there is, and I said that seamounts were generally underexplored. So this data set comes from a series of 40 surveys over a 12-year period. I mentioned the similarity, but one of the things that's important to recognize is that a lot of these seamounts have not been very well sampled. So if you look, for example, at just the total number of species that you find, you'll see this. So it seems like this is depth 500 meters below the surface, 1,000 meters below the surface, and so forth. When you get out here, you'll see, oh my gosh, there's this sort of mid-range between like 1,500 and 2,500. There are more species. If you look, however, at how much sampling effort there was, it shows the same pattern. And so if you divide the number of species by the amount of sampling you've actually done, now it looks more like this. So one of the questions that people sometimes ask is, are these seamounts really what we think they are, or is it just the fact that we've sampled so few of them that we have a very skewed perspective on what's actually there? And it's an ongoing question in terms of seamount ecology. I mentioned something about enhanced food supply, and I want to say just a little bit about that. Just a little bit about that. So it turns out that there's some other physics that goes on, and now we have the flow going this direction. It turns out that because of upwelling and because it's bringing nutrients from deeper water up to shallow water, there's also a plume that gets formed of higher productivity, not on the seamount, but going downstream from the seamount. And this provides a source of nutrition for organisms that live in the ocean up here, not necessarily directly over the seamount. So that's another effect that they have, again, primarily based on physics. There's a second element of that, which is something that's called disruptions to what's called diel vertical migration. So in the ocean, there are animals that spend their daytimes down at depth and come up to the surface at night. And if they're up at the surface at night and they get transported by the currents over a seamount and then start to swim back down, they encounter the seamount when they swim back down. If there are fish living on, or other organisms living on the top of the seamount, it's lunchtime. Actually, based on the timing, it's breakfast time. So all these organisms are swimming down from the surface right into the mouths of the animals that are living on the top of the seamount. And that leads to very high abundance in biomass on the tops of seamounts compared to comparable areas. And I'm just going to show you a few photographs to give you a sense of it. So these are photographs, again, taken on the tops of seamounts. You see some sponges. You'll see they're living on a kind of a rocky structure. There are fishes that are swimming around. There's an anemone up in the corner. And so it's not uncommon to have situations like this where biomass on the top of a seamount is 4 to 5 times what you would find on a nearby continental margin at the same depth. And some of this has to do, and so you get situations like this. Okay, so you said none of you were really fisher folk. But if you do fish, this is very attractive, and this is a place that you want to fish. And so what that leads to, and I'm going to skip for the sake of time, what that leads to is a situation where you can have people who are trying to fish on tops of seamounts, either with a rod and reel, or in some cases with trawls like nets. And because seamounts are they're fragile to an extent because you've got these rocky outcrops with corals on top of them, and they're very sensitive to exploitation. So you wind up with things like a lot of damage happening to fishing gear that rips up the tops of the seamounts. So there have actually been limitations that have been placed on fishing on seamounts in various places, in part because of this damage. And then something we mentioned when we talked about the oceans, I guess 5 semesters ago now, which was one of the threats is the potential exploitation of something Michel mentioned, which are commercially valuable minerals that are contained in these crusts, including things like cobalt, especially cobalt nowadays, cobalt, nickel, copper, manganese, minerals like that. So there have actually been proposals to go out and commercially harvest some of these ferromanganese crusts, which literally involves going down, breaking them off, and the potential environmental damage is still up. Yeah, we'll see what happens, but as of right now, there are no plans to commercially exploit these, except in certain specific areas that are farther away from the continents and out in the middle of the ocean where supposedly nobody cares. But the potential damage to the seamounts themselves and to the biota there is considerable. So with that, I'll stop, hand it over to Sean, and thank you all very much for your attention.
Great. Thank you all for having me, and thank you for coming. I'm really excited to be a part of this. I know that a few of us physicists have been able to contribute to these series in various ways, from I think it was black holes to what it's like to make ultra-cold atomic gases. So I'm really glad to tell you some stuff today about extraterrestrial mountains. So the theme of this whole of today's series are the mountains unseen, the mountains under the ocean, or so one extent we can go to is off of this planet, right? We can go out into the solar system to see and see what we know about the mountains that aren't even here, that we cannot visit at this time, and wonder what it would be like to visit those sometime in the future. So as was said earlier, my expertise is in quantum mechanics, not in astronomy, but my undergraduate research was in astronomy, so it's something of a hobby of mine over the years. And that being said, I've been spearheading our efforts in creating astronomy classes, core classes in the Department of Physics. And so one of them we've created recently is called Exploring the Night Sky. And so in doing that, I'll tell you about some of the things we talk about in our class and some of the things that we've been looking at. So I want my focus here to be what the human experience would be if you were able to visit these places, yeah? Now, these places can't be visited right now, but, actually we may be able to in the near future. So I'll try to talk about those things as we go. So first we need to talk about how do we even know anything about these places. So in the last, few decades, we've had immense progress in probes and landers and telescopes that allow us to look at all of these places and learn a lot about the geology and geography of these places that we could never look at before. We've discovered all kinds of unique environments, some wild places. So the moon is almost one of the simplest ones, with little gravity, no air, and extreme temperatures. Sure, fine, okay. Venus is a crazy, crazy place. It's often referred to as Earth's evil twin, if you want. It's a hellish landscape, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Mars is a little bit more like the moon than we care to admit, but it has some wild geography as well. Those are the closest places to us that we might actually visit in our lifetimes, perhaps. But I will give some honorable mention to the further away places that are moons of other planets like Io, Europa, Titan, and then I have a little bit on Iapetus, which is a special one at the end. So I want to try to ask, what would it be like to try to scale these alien mountains, if you will? So before we get to that, we wonder, how far have we been in the past? So the Apollo program, 1961 to 1972. I'm not here to give you a history lesson, but what I wanted to mention is that we have had people on other worlds. We've had people on the moon, 6 total landings with 24 people having made that small step for mankind, right? So what's wild, though, is that we haven't been back since, right? 1972 was the last time we had people on the moon. That was Apollo 17, Eugene Cernan, the last to leave the moon. This is the photograph of him here, last person on the moon. We've had no crewed spacecraft beyond low Earth orbit since. So we've had people on the International Space Station continuously for many years, but nobody beyond low Earth orbit. The farthest we've gotten away since the Apollo program was quite recently, actually. September 10th, SpaceX did a mission called Polaris Dawn. They went 1,400 kilometers up. This is the farthest people have been away from the Earth since Apollo. which is kind of wild. Like, we could do it. Why are we not doing it? I don't know. So the question is, where are we going from here? So NASA is working on this. The Artemis program is working on getting people back to the moon. They're supposed to launch Artemis 3 in 2026. We'll see if that happens. I don't know. So they did test Artemis 1. They sent an Orion spacecraft around the moon to see what the technology would do. It did not have people on it, obviously, right? But they were testing to see what the radiation environment would be like, and if the thing works. Of course, we need to make sure it works before we send people up there. So this is a graphic showing the path of that thing. And here is a photograph that they took from the Orion capsule back toward Earth. You can see Earth looks like the small one here. All right, that's because it's on the other side of the moon, right? It's quite close to the moon, far away from here. So this is the farthest away that a spacecraft designed to carry people has ever been, right? The Apollo missions went straight to the moon and landed, right? This one actually whipped quite a bit farther away. You can see the trajectory here, right? They actually got behind the moon, if you want, right? And so that's the farthest that any spacecraft designed for human travel has ever been. So that's exciting. We're working on that, and we're hoping for good things. The other thing that came up is quite recently, Sunday, just this last Sunday, was the test launch of SpaceX's Starship. And actually, this slide is an example of one of the things that I do at the beginning of every of my astronomy classes. I do space news. I try to be very excited about it, right? And it turns out that, we have, I do 2 lectures a week. We have enough space news that I can do a cool slide like this every lecture. There's always something, right? And then if there isn't, I'll go back a little bit because these students don't know anything that has happened in the last few years, so I can just pull a slide from last semester, no big deal. All right, yeah, so anyway, space news. SpaceX just launched their Starship on a really incredible test flight. It made the New York Times and everything, and so this is actually a still frame of a video. You guys should check it out, it's wild. But here's the crazy thing. This is not a takeoff shot. This is a landing shot, right? This booster is huge, and they managed to land it back in the place where it took off from. Absolutely incredible. You should check it out. So it's really hard to get a sense of scale here, right, guys? So this is the booster rocket. It takes the ship up. The ship takes off and does its own thing, which also successfully did its test, right? How big is it? This is how big it is. So this is when they're putting the Starship on top of the booster. So this booster right here, this guy right here, imagine people standing in the top of it. That's how big this thing is. You see, it looks like old-timey guys working on a skyscraper, right? This thing is huge, right? And so this, I mention it here because NASA is collaborating with SpaceX to actually land the first people on the moon. The Orion capsule I showed earlier is going to take them out there, and then the Starship, this one, is going to land them on the moon and then take them back to orbit afterward. So that's the plan. Good. Okay, so the next thing I need to talk about, though, if we want to know what it would be like to be there, is we all recognize you need to be wearing a space suit of some sort, right? So these are the modern spacesuits that have been newly designed. They're very similar looking to the old NASA ones, but they are quite a bit lighter. So these ones are 55 kilograms. That is 25 kilograms less than the Apollo spacesuits, which is about 55 pounds lighter, right? So it's 120 pounds of just gear you're wearing here, right? And they used to be more than that. And the reason is that they need to be carrying full autonomous life support, right? You're not hooked to anything when you're walking around on these planets, so they need to carry all your air with you and all that good stuff, batteries. Oh yeah, I used to have a black photograph here. So they used to be, they were hiding the design at first, and so they were black. But you can't wear black in space because the sunlight gets on you and it warms you up, and you have no way to get rid of that energy. So you would cook in your spacesuit. So they have to be white. Now, the ones down on the bottom left are the spacesuits that SpaceX uses for their launches to the International Space Station. These ones are a lot sleeker, a lot cooler looking, I say, but they're not containing their own life support. They're not allowed to get out of the ship wearing these, so that's why they're allowed to be so much smaller. So anytime that you happen to be going out into the solar system, you have to imagine that you're carrying 121 pounds on your back. Okay, so I guess, and to mention that this stuff is all modern, it's recent, right? That this photograph is from their test, their integrated test in just June of this year. Right, so these are the brand new things. Okay, so the first place we might like to visit, obviously the moon, right? So the moon has all kinds of interesting structure. This is a photograph that has had the color enhanced so you can see the different geography of the place, right? And so we see a few different things. We see Maria, comes from Mar, the word for sea, if you want, right? So these are seas of cooled off volcanic rock from the formation of the moon. We see a lot of craters, and mountain ranges. And then there are lava tubes on the moon that we know of. There are these caves that were formed by lava flows that could potentially, we could go in there and, put doors on the sides and then call it home if we wanted to, right? So the environment in these places is functionally airless. There's basically no atmosphere to speak of. The gravity is 1/6 of Earth's gravity. So anything that you weigh, divide it by 6, and that's what it would feel like, right? Also similarly, if you know how high you can jump, you can basically multiply that by 6, and that's how high you could jump. So 1 meter maybe, maybe not me, maybe half a meter. Half a meter, it could turn into 3 meters, right? Which is like a lot, right? Okay. So these places have extreme temperature swings. If you're in the sun, you're 250 Fahrenheit. And if you're in the cold, you're negative 200 Fahrenheit, right? The moon is geologically inactive. It's basically a dead rock at this point, right? Now, why are we interested in going there is that it has been recently discovered that there is water ice frozen in large amounts near the poles of the moon. So you'll notice right here, there's like a crater here, and you can see the sunlight's coming from this side. If the sunlight were to go around it, fine. That side might not always be in the dark, but that guy is always going to be in the shadow because he's near the poles, right? The sun's always going to come in at a steep angle, so the bottom's always in the shade. So those places end up being permanently in a condition of like 27 Kelvin, like really cold. So when ice freezes there, it stays there, right? And there's lots of ice there. We can dig it up. It's basically rocks at this point, right? You can dig it up, throw it in the spaceship, and you can make fuel out of it, right? So if you can make rocket fuel in space, that's a huge advance, right? So we want to be able to do that. Okay, mountains. Now you can see there are lots of mountains here, so I've picked a particular string of them that are pretty interesting. This is a graphic showing a zoomed-in region of the Montes Apenninus, named after the Apennine Mountains in Italy, I believe. So the area that I'm looking up is the top right corner there. The mountain range is here, and we're going to focus in on some parts of this. So you'll notice that the geography of the moon is dominated by impact craters, basically, right? If something big came along, billions of years ago and hit the moon, it makes a big crater, and then the mountain ranges tend to go around the outsides of that. To be clear, I wanted to give a few words, I guess. So montes is the word that we use for a mountain range. It's like a plural of mons. So anything that's in space, a mountain is called a mons, and a mountain range is called montes. And that's true across all of the things that are out there. We use that for the moon and for all of the others. So I want to zoom in a little bit. And so if we look at a better photograph of this mountain range, the one highlighted in red is the Mons Huygens. This is one of the tallest peaks on the moon. I say one of because there's actually taller ones on the backside that we can't see. We didn't know that until we went around it to find out, right? And so this was thought to be the tallest mountain on the moon until, we were able to find out otherwise. So in this photograph, you'll notice there's a region right around here. You see this kind of squiggly line right here? That's got a crack when it was volcanic and kind of solidified. We're going to zoom in on that region here. So you see that same crack right along the top there? This is a photograph from Apollo 15 when they were flying over the moon. This is one of their mapping photos. So you can see that they were taking pictures of all of this stuff as they were flying over. And if we zoom in a little farther, you can get a really good feeling for what the mountains look like if you were at the moon, right? Okay, so this is about as close as we can get right now. But when we have people on the moon again, we're going to get some incredible video, and it's going to be amazing. I'm looking forward to it. So what do you think it would be like to be there? So if you go and look up what videos look like from astronauts on the moon, you'll find a lot of them are falling over. So it's quite awkward to be on the moon. The spacesuit feels like you're wrapped in a 20-pound balloon, right? This thing is the air's trying to get out, right? So this thing's like a puffed-up balloon trying to get off of you, and it also weighs a lot. The low gravity makes the moving around really, really awkward, so people fell over all the time. One of the key challenges when we go to the moon is going to be the dust. So the dust on the moon is like volcanic rock crushed to imperceptibly small scale, right? This stuff is a dust. It's angular. It's really sharp, right? Because there's no wind. There's no water to round out the edges, right? So this stuff gets everywhere. It's also electrically charged from the solar radiation coming from the sun, right? That stuff is coming down, charging that stuff up. So it's basically like the worst dryer lint stuff, like static electricity. It sticks to everything. It gets everywhere. And if you go outside and come back in, it's going to be all over everything, right? So that's going to be one of the hugest challenges of actually going there. One fun story that I read about was Apollo 16 astronaut Charlie Duke was describing how he tried to do a long jump, like see how far I could jump. Well, he did it in such an awkward fashion that he accidentally went backward. and his life support's on his back, right? And if you go 6 meters in the air and then you start coming back down again, if you land on your back and break your backpack, you're dead, right? And so he talked about how, like, that was really scary for him. Like, you go up in the air, and because the gravity's so low, you have a long time to think about it, you know, before you come back down again and land on your backpack and kill yourself, right? So he almost was one of the few astronauts to ever die on the moon. So, like, it was close. Okay, cool. All right, so that's the moon. That might be exciting. We'll see. So the next place I want to go to is Venus. So Venus is the second planet from the sun. It's actually... so it has Earth-like gravity, if you want. Its gravity is very similar to ours, and that's where the similarities end. So the biggest characteristic of Venus is that it has an extremely thick atmosphere. Oh my God, extremely thick. It has had a runaway greenhouse effect where the carbon dioxide is built up to a degree where the surface temperature is 867 degrees Fahrenheit. That's like being in twice as hot as a pizza oven, right? So, like, you know, this whole place is twice as hot as a pizza oven. It has sulfuric acid clouds. It rains battery acid on this place. The pressure at the surface is 92 times Earth's atmosphere. So that's functionally the same, as we were speaking about the diving earlier. It's functionally the same as being 1 kilometer underwater. Now, I know, like, after seeing you guys and how far you've gone down, maybe that's not that deep, but it turns out that that's actually beyond the crush depth for military submarines. 92, and so you need like a special sub to go that low. You guys know better than I do, right? Yeah, so you can't just go down that far in any old, you know, tin can. And so this is just the air, though. It's not water, right? The air is literally that thick, and it's so thick that you'd have to swim through it like molasses. Although I did check, you won't float. You don't float in this stuff. It's not that thick, but it's, you know, it's still thick enough. So the geology of this place is stagnant. Nothing going on. The other thing I'll mention is that it's so close to the sun that its rotation has been halted. So it's kind of like the moon. It's tidally locked as it goes around. It's so each day is about the same length as its year, if you want, right? And so you imagine having 243 days of day on an acid-filled furnace, right? And what it would look like to look out into this would be like looking through the window of your oven, except that's outside. Right? Okay, so have we been there? The Russians landed 4 things on Venus successfully and took some photographs. So this is kind of what they look like. That's what the surface of Venus looks like. They've been landed 4 times, and they quickly fail. Immediately after they land, they eat themselves because they're basking in acid at furnace temperatures, right? So how do we know what the surface looks like? Let me point out this really quick. The atmosphere is so thick you can't see the ground. You can't. So what we do is we send a probe around it, and we use radar to see what the surface of Venus looks like. So I wanted to especially highlight mountains. Maxwell Montes is the tallest mountain on Venus. It's 11 kilometers tall, 36,000 feet. Now, interestingly, if you go to the top of it, the atmospheric pressure is only 44 atmospheres instead of 92. So that's kind of nice. What's wild about this is that there's no active geology here, so it's speculated that the mountain didn't actually form from tectonic motion or anything like that. It's that the atmosphere was so heavy that it literally pushed the ground down around the damn thing, right? So it got pushed up by the atmosphere itself. I don't know, that's pretty wild. So, okay, fun story though. When they were doing this radar scanning of the surface, they have a probe going over and they're looking at the radar of the ground, and they noticed that the mountains had bright snow-capped tops on them. Like, they look like snow-capped mountains. You'd be like, wait a second, that's a furnace down there. Can't possibly be snow. What could be happening? So it turns out what they think is happening. The temperature on Venus is high enough to vaporize lead. Metals melt and vaporize in this place, right? So if you were able to melt lead at lower atmosphere, at lower heights, right, that stuff could be carried up into the clouds and would snow metallic compounds. So these things are mountaintops covered in snow-capped peaks of metallic snow that have crystallized in the upper atmosphere and then snowed down onto the mountaintop. So they might look a little familiar, right? But that's definitely not snow up there, folks. Right? So this graphic was obviously an artistic rendition from a NOVA special about storms on other planets. You should check it out. It's pretty cool. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to hurry up. All right, so Mars. We got to talk about Mars. It's probably the place that's easiest to go to if you want to, right? So it has gravity that's twice the moon, but 38% Earth. Days are about the same as the Earth, has seasons, all that kind of good stuff. Has almost no atmosphere. So it has wind and stuff. There are dust storms, but there's basically no atmosphere to speak of. So it's not like you can just walk out in here with a gas mask on or something. You need a proper spacesuit to go here. The temperatures wildly range, but they can be a reasonable temperature. But the atmosphere is too thin for liquid water. Any water that would melt would vaporize immediately. It will never hold liquid form. But we have discovered a significant amount of water ice and carbon dioxide ice in various places on Mars. And recently, it was discovered that below the surface of Mars, there's a lot of water, that if you could pull it all up and melt it, it would cover the entire planet in something like a few meters worth of water. So that water is there, we just need to get there. What do we know about it? So the Curiosity and Perseverance rovers are there right now doing science. And they love taking selfies because it's the 2020 and stuff, right? So selfies, this is Curiosity rover. You can see the structure of the mountains in the back and the geology and everything. That's really great. This one's Perseverance. And Perseverance, giving you a little wink there. Now, one thing that I wanted to point out about Perseverance is that guy right behind it. This rover carried a little helicopter. Did you guys know this? It carried a little helicopter called Insight, and Insight made 72 flights before it crashed and ate itself just last year. So this is a photograph. This is a video from Perseverance watching the little Insight helicopter go up, and I have video of it flying around the Mars and stuff and checking out all the cool places. So the mountains. Olympus Mons is the tallest mountain in the solar system. It is 21.9 kilometers tall. That's 72,000 feet. Significantly higher than Everest, 2.5 times. It's 600 kilometers across, right? It is a shield volcano, so it's the same kind of thing as Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa. But why it was able to get so tall is that there's no plate tectonics on Mars. The plates aren't moving around, right? So if you had the hot spot, like where the Hawaiian Islands are, and it just like sat there, then that island would be able to get bigger and bigger and bigger without moving over, right? So how big is it? This is a quick kind of graphic. Mount Everest, Mauna Kea in comparison to Olympus Mons. Much taller. How big is it? There's the country of France. So it basically covers all of France. It's the size of Arizona, if you want, basically, right? That's how big this thing is. So this is a graphic that was taken by putting together laser altimetry data with a photograph, so you can actually see what the kind of the 3D structure of it is. What would it be like to be there? You would need a spacesuit on. It's twice moon's gravity, so it's a heavier suit, but not that much, still awkward. There are sandstorms here, right? Because you've seen The Martian, maybe, right? But the storms, the air is so thin that you would have a dust storm, and it would simply mean you can't see. It's not like it would knock anything over. That part was totally blown out of proportion, right? So the sandstorms don't matter at all. It was so fine. All right. It's so big. While it's tall, it's also big. The slope is actually only about 7%. So you could walk up it. It's a hill, but it's not crazy, right? Now, what I wanted to point out here, though, is that you see the edges have these cliff edges that can be as much as 6 miles high, right? So 6 miles is just a little edge of it there, right? So one might wonder what would happen if you fell off of it, right? I wanted to do a little bit of physics here, right? So the terminal velocity is how fast you go before the wind resistance slows you down. So how big a skydiver falls or something. Turns out because the air is so thin, terminal velocity is 4.4 times higher. So if you were to fall off of this, the gravity is weaker, so you fall slower, basically, right? But you can get to a higher final velocity, and if you have enough distance to do that, you will. So it turns out you would get to terminal velocity between 4 and 5 miles worth of falling. So if you fell off of one of these 6 mile high cliffs, you would hit the ground going 500 miles per hour. That's not so good. Good, yeehaw, right. Okay, one fun thing I read is that somebody on the internet, don't trust them, claimed that if you're standing at the base of Olympus Mons, you can't see the peak because of the curvature of the planet. So I checked. So let's see, really quickly. So if you're standing on the top of Mars and you wonder how far away is Olympus Mons is over there in the distance, would your horizon line intersect the top of it? So if you do some quick geometry using, this is the key, it's 600 kilometers across, but the middle is 300, right? I think that's what they did, is they took the whole width, and that's why they got the answer they did. If you only do half, like to the peak, 300 kilometers across, you do simple geometry, you find out that the minimum height of something so you can see it that far away with that curvature of that planet is 13 kilometers. And remember, this thing's 21 kilometers high, so you can see the top of it, but barely. Okay. All right, so I'm out of time, so I got some what do you call it, honorable mentions. Io is a moon of Jupiter. It is a volcanic moon with 400 active volcanoes on it, lakes of molten silicate, sulfur, snow, and no atmosphere. This place is wild. It's a bunch of volcanoes. We've seen a plume. You can see over there, that's a volcano going off as the probe was going by. Pretty wild. Europa is another moon of Jupiter. This is also space news. We just launched NASA's Project Europa Clipper, launched Monday morning. And they're going to go to this place and start looking at it. What's wild about this is that there's a miles thick shell of ice, but we have good reason to believe that there's a many miles thick ocean underneath. And it would be warmed by the ocean vents that we just saw so many photographs of, right? With ancient life that was first created on Earth, could have been created there just as well with the same environmental conditions. All they need are the warm vents and the salt water and the sulfur dioxide and all that good stuff, right? So, yeah, so we're headed there. This thing will get there in 2030. So it takes a long time to get there. It's going to fly by a bunch of times and give us all kinds of cool data. Titan is probably my favorite. It's actually the most like Earth that you can find out of here. And what I mean by that is that it has almost exactly the same atmosphere of Earth. Same atmospheric pressure. It's primarily nitrogen, so just like ours, except there's no oxygen there. The only problem is that it's super cold, right? So it's like negative 290 Fahrenheit, minor problem. It's so it turns out, though, that on this place, there are lakes and rivers. Lakes and rivers on this place, right? But they're not water. They're liquid methane. It's so cold that methane gas condenses into a liquid and rolls around on the surface of this place, all right? But you wouldn't really need like a spacesuit that could handle the, 990 atmospheres or anything like that. You would just need to stay warm and provide a little oxygen, and you could cruise around on this place maybe, right? So this is a moon of Saturn, real far away. Okay, do I have time? No, I need to stop, huh? Okay, I wanted to talk about this. Oh my gosh. All right, this is the last thing though. Okay, so Iapetus is a moon of Saturn, and it has this really weird ridge that goes across it. We're talking about mountains, right? So this ridge, I was wondering just like, how do you think that got there, Like, it can't be regular tectonic formation for that, right? So what's believed is that this thing crashed into something, and then that thing that it crashed into broke into pieces and slowly drifted into the moon and kind of like, laid itself out, if you want, on the surface here, right? So you might think of that as like a pile of rubble or something, right? Okay, so this is an extreme example, another one of Saturn. This is actual photograph, people, right? This is a photograph of another of the moons of Saturn where this exact process gave you this weird kind of ravioli shape to this moon. Okay, last slide, I promise. So this is what I want to leave with. In 2021, Bill Shatner, Cap Kirk, right, went up to space. And you might say, if anybody's going to love going to space, it would be Captain Kirk, right? Upon returning, he gave an interview, and he said this: I love the mystery of the universe. He talked about all the great things in space he's really interested in. All of that has thrilled me for years, but when I looked in the opposite direction into space, there was no mystery, no majesty, no majestic awe to behold. All I saw was death. He came down and he was super depressed because he realized that when you're in space, there's no safety up there. Your life is at risk every moment that you're in space. There is nowhere safe up there. There's no planet we can go to, no moon we can go to. Everything you do up there is at the whim of our technology, right? So his realization when he came back was that this planet, this place, is the only place where we are safe, the only place where we can live without constant death at the door, right? And so it really gave him a new appreciation for the planet Earth and all of the nature that we have here. So with all of the cool shit that we looked at, we can still think about how precious this place is. All right, thank you.